Entrepreneurship Ecosystem for Africa. 3 insights from someone who has straddled both worlds. And this is from Mr. York Zucchi. He is a former Goldman Sachs banker and TEDx speaker. York Zucchi is a Swiss-born investor and entrepreneur with over 29 years business experience across many countries. He's a strong believer in the power of SMEs to improve the world, and his past and present projects have and are impacting entrepreneurs in over 83 countries. And as I said earlier on, he is our chief coffee drinker. And, you know, who better to have coffee with than someone who loves coffee when you're having introductory meetings. Welcome, York. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. A wonderful good afternoon, and lovely to meet all of you, and apologies for not being there live in person.
Sorry. All good. We can hear you. Thank you.
Perfect. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to keep it nice, sweet, and short. I'm joining you live from Milan. Apologies, I can't be in the room with you right now, but the coffee is substantially better here. I just landed. So, I have, as a background and context, I'm going to give you 30 seconds background, and then we jump into 3 key takeaways that are going to be hopefully practically relevant to broaden your perspective. I am a practical entrepreneur and investor. In other words, I am not an academic researcher. So the feedback and the insights that I will be giving you today are really based on our work in over 83 countries, supporting startups and SME development. As a background, I'm originally from Switzerland, as you may have heard. I've worked in over 11 countries for 9 different corporates. I got fired 5 times. Quit my job 2 times just before they could fire me. And in 2, I made enough money for me to start my own businesses and start investing. And I've done that in wild degrees of success and failure for the last 16 years, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, the topic of today is really a bit of a misnomer in the sense as what can we learn from the Swiss entrepreneurship ecosystem? I think it's a bit arrogant in the sense that there's a lot we can learn from the African, as a broad generalization, ecosystem of what can be also applied in Switzerland. However, there are a couple of things that are useful, and I'm going to touch on them in the 3 following topics. The one is education is bad. The second topic, size matters, and forgive me for the cheesy titles. And the third one is boring is good. So in terms of education is bad, did you know that over 70% of people, of adults in Switzerland didn't go to universities? And yet 99.2% of all businesses are small and medium-sized enterprise in Switzerland. And as you know, the quality of life, the standard of living is extremely high. And personally, for me, the cost of a coffee is very high, which is a major disappointment for me. But that's a story for another day. The point here is that education, all education is good. So when I say education is bad, I mean it tongue in cheek. You know, we need to focus, especially in the entrepreneurial ecosystem development, on practical hands-on education. So this drive that a lot of families in sub-Saharan Africa have to, and I understand it, to want to send their kids to university and get that much sought after degree, which increases social standing and all that, may be very good from an ego perspective and for some individuals, but for the large majority, it's actually counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve. I posted this morning a link on LinkedIn, you're most welcome to have a look, where I outline a couple of steps for people, especially parents, that they can pursue in terms of installing an educational mindset in young people. But what we really should be doing, and perhaps this is an invitation to all of you who represent or who wear university hat or educational hats, is to democratize your education and make it easier to access and more palatable for young and slightly and not so young people to access, maybe in a digitally supported way. a little bit like Coursera does and many other of these organizations. So if you have an amazing professor who teaches finance or who teaches marketing, why not interview and create micro courses which would give away for free to the nation? We've got to bring the knowledge in a way that it's practically relevant to the entrepreneurs. And there's nothing better than a university that understands, like the gentleman just spoke about Rwanda. So invite somebody who understands local culture, understands local nuances of doing business. The second one, size matters. We spoke about that 99% of all people who work in Switzerland work for small and medium-sized enterprises. So when we speak, and the point of this conference highlights it so beautifully, when we speak about creating entrepreneurs, creating SMEs, this is not a nice to have, a feel-good exercise. This is not a checklist on some sustainability goal. This is crucial if we want to empower Africa to tap into the success that it really deserves, to let Africans own African destiny. And we can only do that when we empower the masses. And I say that respectfully. We need everyone out there to start, and not always successfully, not always easily, but to start businesses. And only by starting a business will they really learn what it means to be an entrepreneur. There's only so much we can teach them. And we currently work with over 409 cities across the world. And we can tell you firsthand that the best school of business is a school of doing. So let's create ecosystems that support and encourage people to start. And if you want to be very practical, interview entrepreneurs. If you are a government organization, showcase the stories, maybe in 15-minute clips. This young man started this, and this is how he grew this local pharmacy. This gentleman started a local delivery, and now today he has over 6 bakkies or trucks or bicycles doing this and that. And this is how he or she did it. Give more roles, examples, not roles. I forgot the word now. Forgive me, jet lag. There's no jet lag, but I'll use that as an excuse. By the way, that if you don't know, in Switzerland, when you're born, they surgically remove your sense of humor. So if many of my jokes today fall particularly flat, at least you have a little bit of context. I wish I was in the room with you. But this is important. We've got to make entrepreneurship attractive and sexy. We have to bring back the desire and the awareness that entrepreneurship is not even an option. It is what you should select as your first option. And the reason for this is that we are swamped on social media about finding a job in government, finding a job in municipality, finding a job at a company. And so we think that our only option is to find a job, where the reality is exactly the opposite. Jobs are becoming fewer and scarcer. We cannot keep promoting that. And it's not blaming anybody. Large companies have a bigger budget than a small business to advertise jobs. And so we get that perception that jobs is the way in what we should do. So let's change that narrative. Invite people who graduated from any program that you have to share their stories, to put links and resources, how they did it. The more we share, the more we give people a chance to figure out what to do practically tomorrow morning. Now, the third point is really about why boring is good. And this is more about the findings from our research and from our work across 27 countries, was that the more boring a government is, the more predictable tax laws are, investment scenarios are. When you create a boring and predictable ecosystem for companies to be part of, you are actually attracting long-term investors. And this is important because a lot of the entrepreneurship development programs on the continent are fly-by-nights. And I mean this as a generalization. They come, there are lots of fanfare, a bit of articles and so forth. After 6 months, a year or 2 years, they fizzle away. And part of the reasoning is that these programs are funded by corporates, and I'm going to say this with love and respect, who are very opportunistic. They come on the continent, and I'm not talking about the ones who are local, to extract as much value from the economies as possible, because they don't know what the economic environment will look like 7, 10, 15 years from now. Again, I generalize. And when you create an unstable environment, you're not incentivizing people to invest in the long run. To say, okay, I'm going to look after this community and I'm going to look after them for the next 8 years. And these are the tax laws that govern my investment. And this is how I can write off and so forth and so on. I know you know that, but I just want to remind you that borrowing is good and has huge implications on the initiatives that we support. A subtext to that is that and this is really around the work that we do right now with 409 cities, including, for example, in South Africa, city of Cape Town, where we launched, I think, 4 weeks ago, the City of Cape Town Entrepreneurship Academy, available for free to 4.7 million residents. And here's something interesting. There's 2 types of entrepreneurship development that we've seen. There's a niche one, the deep tech, the next medical innovation, the climate change tech. And then there's the mass entrepreneurship development support. They are very different in scope, in need, and in how we create them. And if I may give you one piece of advice, and please feel free to butcher it in any shape and form, depending on the local circumstances, or disagree with it, of course, is that when you talk about niche support, for example, we talk about, the word escapes me, at universities, acceleration, when you take intellectual property and to commercialize it. I just forget the name right now and I can't hear you. So I wish somebody could just put up their hand and tell me. But the technology transfer office. So that requires a very niche, very hardcore, very focused and resource-rich support infrastructure. And often organizations make that mistake and think that we need to apply that also for the masses. And I say this with love, the masses need to go through an education program. If you want to help the masses, bring out technology-supported initiatives that are cheap or, let's say, cost-effective to run, duplicate, and multiply across regions. Work with local partners, but don't over-invest, because otherwise you have initiatives that pop up and burn out after a year when the funding runs out. So in closing, here's a little bit of research. 3 takeaways from the studies that we've done over the last 16 years about what works and what doesn't in entrepreneurship development. So the first one is practical education trumps academic education. Again, I'm talking about entrepreneurship education. I'm not talking about now the important role that universities play in the development of people and knowledge. But we need to develop content that teaches somebody what to do practically tomorrow morning. The second takeaway, access to mentoring is much more a key driver of success for a person starting a business than people, including us, had envisioned. And part of it is the access to the knowledge and experience that the person has. But there's another factor which is very interesting. We didn't anticipate. It actually came, I don't want to admit this in public, and maybe this is not the forum to admit it, but it really came almost by a mistake question we added to the survey. And it's this. When you have a mentor, you actually have an accountability partner. You have somebody who checks in with you once a week, once a month, who says, okay, you did this. You told me last time this is where you're at. What have you done since then? And we need to create accountability partners who help us, not necessarily who open doors all the time. And this opening doors is a third key takeaway before I close. Support your entrepreneurs with access to networks. Access to markets, meaning finding clients, is essentially an access to networks challenge. If you, and I'm saying this as a broad generalizations, please forgive me, when you're a young person in Diepsloot, in Khayelitsha, in Alexandria, in many other enormously, phenomenally talented pools of geographic locations around the continent, you don't have access to the potential client who sits in a nice office in Sandton or in Cape Town CBD. And so what we need to create, or our responsibility as entrepreneurship ecosystem developers, and this is not by any means easy, is to help our entrepreneurs with getting a foot into organizations where they can be accelerated or incubated. That doesn't have to be formal. So I don't mean by this, by taking somebody who's growing 6 bags of potatoes and has 2 trees of chilies in the back garden and trying to make him a pick and pay supplier. That's unrealistic. But maybe put them next to a restaurant, introduce them to a vegan restaurant chain who can buy from them. Incubate them with local businesses that can support them, that can say, young man, you are trying to grow these crops. Actually, for the next season, I'm more interested in, I don't know, a slightly different type of crop. And I'll help you by financing the seeds that you're going to buy. So let's start matching. Let's be a Tinder for small businesses, but in a way that it matches the entrepreneur's phase of business to the person we're matching them to's needs. So a corporate match with a tiny microscopic startup is a recipe for disaster, generally speaking. So that is my 3 main takeaways of what we can learn from Switzerland. And I hope it was useful. I have sprinkled it in with a lot of research that we've done over the last 16 years across the world. Thank you for having me. Congratulations on what has been an intensive 2 days, and really, really hope we can connect and get in touch also on LinkedIn, maybe perhaps later. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, York. It's always lovely to hear from you and to